Welcome to Conversations from the Yellow Chair. Hi, I'm Andrea Bryk, and I'm the owner and director of Waves of Harmony. And with me today is Greg Roberts, PhD, who's the owner and director of Grief and Trauma Support.
Hi, Andrea. Good to be back talking with you.
It's so exciting because we are about to begin this part of a three-part series of how to choose a therapist. Mm-hmm. And this is vlog 2 of our whole series, Conversations from the Yellow Chair. I'm so happy to have you join us. We will be talking about how to choose a therapist in 3 parts. So today's talk will focus on, do I need a therapist? And part 2 will be focusing on basically the whole, what do you want to get out of therapy, when you're choosing a therapist, what modality are you choosing, what type of person are you engaging with, and what are you getting out of it, and how is that working for you? And the third part will be more about, have I had enough? Am I done with therapy, or has therapy run its course, or in some cases is therapy just not working with this modality or person that I've chosen? So this 3-part series will hopefully give you a good idea and some things to reflect on. We just want to emphasize that these talks are, we're sharing this as a fireside chat, so none of this has been scripted. We have some ideas that we'd like to speak on, and we've collaborated together with our ideas. This is a holistic space. This isn't just about finding a therapist to take care of your psychological problems. We're recognizing that sometimes we go through life and things come up for us physically through maybe sort of health challenges or health scares. We recognize that things could come up relationally, with our relationships in life, emotionally, and spiritually through questioning ourselves and our choices, or it could be through circumstances that we're going through in different situations. Perhaps we've just gone through some loss or hard times.
Yeah, even in the environment. So, if there have been, in some areas, like natural disasters or things like that have happened in the environment around you as well. So many different
things. And I mean, we can go into more of those, including past traumas and things like that as well. So today we'll be speaking to those points, and hoping that you find that you can grab something out of this. And we're going to touch on a range of things. So as we go through this talk, there might be things that sort of poke at you that you might be experiencing right now. It might cause some emotions, and we want to just reassure you that could just be the sign that you need to take some different action. So we'll go through some points and hopefully steer you in with some guidance and gentle guidance. And this is not a prescriptive telling you how to or who to or what to do kind of talk. So we hope that you enjoy it. So without further ado, Greg might just speak to some of those things. What might be telling somebody that they might need therapy, or do they need therapy?
Yeah. I think as you just mentioned, there are a whole range of things that might tell us that we would benefit from therapy. Often it can be, and I guess one of the things, as Andrea mentioned, maybe even watching this little video, you might notice as we talk about things that you think, that something like that is going on for me right now. And you might notice that you feel like, I'm noticing something in me. It's feeling like, that's affecting me in some way. So some of those little indicators that come from not just your thoughts, but sometimes how you're feeling about things, noticing that you're feeling a bit differently about a situation or what you're thinking or what you're facing at the time. And I think, as you touched on as well, sometimes it's circumstances might indicate that therapy or accessing counselling could be a good idea. So the area that I work in a lot around grief and loss. Sometimes people feel like I've experienced a loss and that's a normal thing, so I should be able to cope with this on my own. But actually, we live in a society that sometimes you're not able to freely talk about what's going on for you. So having access to a therapist can sometimes be really useful. Or it might be a change or a breakdown in a relationship. And again, people can think, oh, I'll just cope with this, or I'll just get busy and do what I need to do. But again, you probably noticing that feeling of either being busy or pressure or a bit of stress, we might call it, that's experienced. So any of those things can be just those indicators of maybe it might be a good idea. And the final one that I think that is important, or not the final one, but another one is if you have people around you saying things like, I'm a little bit concerned about you at present. I've been noticing some things, or I feel like it might be good if you went and talked to someone. And it can be very easy to just be responding with, no, I don't know what you're talking about, I'm okay. But it's just recognising that if people are saying that to you, to maybe just, if you can, just stop and consider what might it be like to just make one appointment to talk to a counsellor or therapist, to just share what's going on for you and see. It doesn't mean that you have to sign up for years of therapy, but just check out the idea of, might this be something that could be useful? So there's some of the things that I think.
So it sounds like, if I was to sort of put that in another way, is that there's going to be some perhaps internal things that you might be going through, some internal turmoil or questioning or things like that. But there also could be these sort of external things that are happening, such as situations, circumstances, or even people noticing things about you that could lead to the thought of, oh, maybe I need a therapist. And I also want to actually point out another scenario, which is, you might not feel like you need a therapist, but it's just like going to the GP. Sometimes you just go to the GP to get checked out, or just look into your sort of your health in a holistic way a little bit more. And that could lead to just feeling better about yourself, going from, I call it surviving to thriving. You're not just getting through situations, but you're actually getting through them and actually learning from them. You're actually creating new patterns or new routines, and this is what therapists can help with as well.
Absolutely. And I think what comes up for me hearing that is even the feeling or noticing that you just feel a bit out of sorts. People might use that phrase. And a bit like you might go and see a GP because physically or medically you feel like something's not right. That can happen with other aspects of your life, that you're just feeling like, just feeling out of sorts or a bit unsure about things in a way that I haven't previously. So something's a bit, I guess that's the thing, something's a bit different. And even if you're not sure what it is, but just that feeling of something's a bit different. And I think ultimately and you're probably similar, Andrea, what I often say to people is having that perspective from someone outside your situation, who isn't family, isn't friends, that's what often can help when you're trying to sort of work out what's actually going on with me at present. It's not that they're there to fix you or, delve into your innermost thoughts, but it's just having that perspective.
And perhaps it's just a little bit a good time to sort of define that the therapy that we're suggesting, or I think in our experience that's really most helpful, could be the kind of therapy that's not necessarily prescriptive or telling you what to do. It's not going to be like going to a GP and popping a prescription. It's going to be, if anything, the therapist might provide some homework for you to do, which will be more about how you go about your day and the things that you're being aware of in your day. So it's less prescriptive, sort of not going somewhere like, all right, I'm going to jump into this session and after that I'll be right and ready for the world. It might be a process that takes time,
Yeah.
And it could be something that you work on over time. So not to have that expectation that you might walk in and look, that could happen to you. It has happened to me where I've walked into a session and just felt like, wow, I've really just gotten to the bottom of that and I can leave that now. So it can have that effect, but we're not necessarily always expecting that that's the case.
Yeah. And that does also make me think of, building on that, the sort of counselling and therapy we're talking about is where the therapist helps you to find what you need within yourself, or understanding that you maybe have some abilities or ways of managing things, but you just need some help to find those things, discover those things in yourself. Mm-hmm. And I know it's a bit of a strange analogy, but even in the counselling therapy space, there's also coaching. And so using that terminology, it's like having someone work with you and understand how you are in your life and in the world.
Yeah.
What are the things that you're maybe finding a bit challenging, and then to coach you a bit in being able to find your own way to manage that. And yes, offer ideas and strategies and all of that, but you being in charge of, where it goes and having that direction. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, of course, again, in this talk, we're going to just touch on some things, and of course, we're looking forward to comments and other people's views on what we say and also what else is out there, because there's so much to unpack. But what we're trying to give you is just a little bit of a glimpse, sort of take away that sort of feeling of, I'm going to a psychologist and they're going to just get into my head and change me or do something. We have all these impressions because of the media. We have these impressions because of what we hear, and not even what we hear, but what we imagine. And I think that's probably, we have these sort of preconceived ideas of what therapy is, and it's a lot of times not even close to that. So I also want to take away sort of this feeling of, I am saying that most people have expectations, and I want to just sort of diffuse that a little bit, because I think, in my experience at least, finding people that were there along my journeys of physical and sort of psychological and spiritual need were different and varied along my journey. And I think that I would say most cases, they were mostly accidental, or just happened to be, I just happened to come across them at the right time. And we could argue that, yes, of course, I did seek them out, or when we're in a space, we kind of know what we need and we find it. But in a more sort of, in a practical sense, I don't think I actually knew what I needed or was seeking it out. So I think to take that expectation off of really going out and finding the right person, you're not going to marry this person. It's not a relationship for life. It's very much seeking what you're needing, and it could be through just some trial and error along the way.
Absolutely. And I think that's so important, Andrew, because sometimes we might go and see a counsellor or a therapist, and their role is for us to understand what doesn't work for us. So even if you go and see someone and you sort of work out, this doesn't seem to be landing for me, it actually can be useful. So rather than saying, therapy doesn't work for me, it's taking the idea of actually that style of therapy hasn't landed for me, so I know that's not going to work. So I look for someone who works a bit differently to how that person works.
That's right. And as I mentioned in our introductions, is that sometimes things just aren't presented by the person in the right way. And I've had people actually come to me and say they've tried CBT with other therapists and it's never worked, but suddenly what I'm giving them is CBT, and they respond, and when I tell them it's CBT, they're shocked. Never worked for me before. Well, it's because this is my method. This is the way I go about it. So different therapists have different ways of working and different ways of presenting things, and just different personalities, let's just say, in general. So there's this feeling of like, I'm going to find this, but in sometimes we find other things. And remembering that we go to therapy not always knowing everything about even ourselves, that some things are latently sort of subconscious. Sitting there that we don't even have any idea, that those are the things that are actually creating some of this sort of discomfort.
And I think also important in this and this is really good because I'm noticing we're sort of riffing off each other. And
that's
that's partly what we're talking about. It's like actually going with an experience. But I was just thinking it's also considering what you have a sense you might be needing from therapy as well. Because sometimes there might be something going on. For example, not always the case, but for example, if other people have been saying to you, I'm concerned about you for these reasons, maybe counselling or therapy would be useful, you might be looking for counselling or therapy that challenges you. So you might be wanting to feel challenged. You might be feeling like, oh, there's stuff going on that I'm obviously not seeing or understanding. I want someone to challenge me. Whereas for other people, it could be that you're feeling a bit fragile or unsettled, and so what you might be looking for is someone that you feel really safe with, connected to, where you can just be and talk through what's happening. And even though the therapist might challenge you, you want that to be gentle, whereas another person might want, actually I want the therapist to just give it to me, challenge me, set me some tasks, hold me to account. But for someone else, that's absolutely not what you're wanting. And as you said, different counsellors and therapists will offer a range of those styles and can often adapt to what you're needing, but it sometimes is finding the person who sort of meets you in the way that you want to be met.
That's right. So far what we've said is basically there could be some internal or external things that are going on that are giving you some of these sort of like clues that you might want this, or as I mentioned, it could also be sort of more of a just checking in kind of a space for yourself, or just seeking something a little bit, take yourself to the next level type of a thing. And when we say therapy, I think there's also, we could take that apart a little bit too and just say some of this that we're talking about is not necessarily therapy. It could be a psychiatrist, it could be a psychologist, it could be a counselor, it could be a chaplain, it could be a music therapist, it could be a grief and trauma support worker, it could be a coach, it could be, even life coaches are therapists in a way, and even we could even stretch it out to say our hairdressers are kind of therapists in a way. We know that a lot of times volunteers who come into the house like they did in palliative care turn out to be great therapists, people that are helpful. I think when I speak about therapists, what I'm thinking of more is people with sort of a background in credentials with sort of evidence-based frameworks, or maybe not so much evidence-based even, but at least frameworks that guide their practice that you feel safe and sound with. Those are the ones we're speaking to, that you might be considering a little bit more.
And I think, as you're saying, it's hard to sort of say categories or levels, but I think at its basis, I often refer to, I guess, the origins of language, of seeking someone's counsel, and that can happen at a range of levels. We can seek the counsel of another member of our family. We can seek the counsel of an elder in our spiritual community or within our cultural group, someone who's seen as someone who's lived life a little bit more or a bit differently. So there's that, right through to, as you're talking about, people who've actually done training and professional development to sort of build those skills at a different level and bring in strategies and ideas and understanding. So there's that whole range of seeking someone's counsel, which goes through to having therapy and having a therapist. And so that's worth thinking about as well, because I know some of what we're going to talk about over these 3 sessions is also individual counselling or groups. And sometimes in group work, you're seeking the counsel of other people who've maybe had a similar experience to you.
Sure. Yeah.
So again, there's that whole range of thinking about, as we're saying, what is it that's sort of making you feel that you might need to seek someone's counsel or see a therapist or go to a group. And in subsequent sessions, we'll start to tease out some of the details of that.
Yeah. And I think going back to that sort of idea of going into this, and I think perhaps for some people watching could be their first step at finding a therapist, which is kind of, this is a lot of the audience we're gearing this for, is, those people who don't know anything, where do I start? And I think that sometimes people, again, have these expectations of I'm going to go and I'm going to get fixed. And I think sometimes also people have this expectation that it's a lot like medicine. I just have to pop a pill. There's no sort of adverse sort of feelings or effect. And I think that sometimes going into therapy, even just making that step of finding out the information, looking around and contacting people, there's a bit of discomfort in that.
Yes.
There's a bit of discomfort in stepping into the space of even going, I need a therapist. And just sitting with that and just being okay with that for yourself, and not worrying about what other people think, how you access what you need or what you need.
Yes.
And how you go about that. So I think just sort of saying that there are some levels of discomfort, and when you're already feeling vulnerable, this can be quite tricky.
Yes.
That I think that in these spaces we often, if you're a person right now who's sitting there going, I really need a therapist, I'm so stuck, I'm so depressed, I'm not able to function, your quality of life is just so low at the moment, and then chances are what you're looking for a lot of times isn't readily available. So this is a whole other issue, is that sometimes when we get up sort of up the stream to these psychologists and people who are really sort of credentialed, is that they have waiting lists, a long waiting list, so you can wait for weeks or even months sometimes. So do you want to speak to that a little bit, Craig?
Yeah, because I think that can be incredibly difficult, that you find that you realise that you would benefit from counselling or therapy, or really wanting to talk to someone. You start to identify that, and then you start looking, and then you feel like you're starting to find what you need, only to hear that it's not available right now. And yet maybe there's been a whole process for you to get to that point, and you're ready and feel like you need it, and you don't want to keep sitting with what's going on. I'm
ready. Now, wait.
And sometimes months can be the case.
Absolutely.
It depends.
Yeah.
And what we really wanted to speak to is that it's important to think about what else might you be able to do, rather than see that counselling or therapy is the thing that I have to go to. So, yes, if you find someone that you think is going to work for you, put your name on the wait list. But in the meantime, there are, like we were talking earlier, even what we're doing here, versions of videos on YouTube that can talk about particular topics that might be relevant to what's happening for you. So seeking those out. There are apps out there that can be useful, particularly around things like mindfulness and mindfulness-based approaches. There are helplines out there that people can access. And so it's looking at still building this sense of what you need. So I guess your starting point is noticing that there is something needed.
Yeah.
And not seeing that a counsellor or therapist is going to be the only thing. Yes, connect to that, but also look at what else could you bring into your life that may not be the same as counselling or therapy, but it holds you or supports you and adds something into the mix. I don't know if you wanted to add some things as well.
Yeah, so I tend to have this sort of, I call it my hierarchy, and I present this to a lot of people that I work with because I think it's really important to differentiate sort of levels of need. And I call it a hierarchy because, not because one is better than the other, but because I see them as sort of how you're engaging or how you need engagement when you're feeling the need for engagement. So I think when we're just going through life, as we do, we can self-regulate and we can provide our own internal sort of stabilizing therapy, if you will. Often I come across people who are already using music therapeutically. They listen, they have a playlist that changes their mood when they're in not such a good space, or goes into things that they need to express more. And they're okay and they can function using those playlists. Or you might need to spend 10 minutes a day meditating, just being still and breathing and paying attention to your breath. And you can guide yourself through that. So I call this just sort of your own resources. You tap into your own resources and you're able to regulate yourself and calm yourself and address the things that you think are creating some discomfort, and able to go on with your day. You're still able to function. Then there's the point where it's just not happening. Your brain might be so busy, or your health isn't great because now it's affecting you physically, because all this anxiety is creating, your nervous system's always on, you're in fight and flight, you're going a million miles an hour, your family's stressing you out, everything seems to be sort of, the walls are caving in and you're spiraling. I hear this word a lot, spiraling. So at this point I say, all right, and if we don't have access to a therapist, this might be a point where you look at apps, where you look at what you were talking about, those other resources that are outside of you, because you're not able to regulate yourself, but you can go somewhere, find it on your phone, find it on your laptop, find it in the community, through nature, perhaps even taking a walk. So these external things. So looking for these, and guided. So guiding you through this, I say they're for everybody and nobody, because they're not written specifically for you, but they're written for situations like what you're in. So you can usually just do a Google search and find some sort of talk or guidance through that. So this is when you're not strong enough, but you're not quite, it's not that bad. You can still use those resources to get through. And then when I say, this is when you really need one-on-one support, is going to a therapist who's really going to help you through a situation, is even those resources are just kind of holding you, or maybe they're not even working that well. Yeah. So that's the point when I say, all right, so what we need to do then is really inspire some shifting and changing and some guidance that's specific to you to get through that, so that you can function again. So I think that's sort of laying out that sort of hierarchy, and I'm sure I missed a couple things, but that's the general sense. And everybody will be a little bit different. Your resources will be different in those three places. Who you even go to might be different, as we talked about. Ththere's different levels of those, or levels, but just different types of those resources as well. And again, looking in all these spaces, as these don't have to be permanent, that these things can change over time, that you may need one for right now, but then later on something else, you might find different resources. And this is all about building your toolbox as a person, just like we do with medicine. Oh, I know that drug worked for this, and I know that drug, and I had an adverse effect to this one. It's very similar, and maybe at some points in our life that changes in medicine. It can also change in our psychological space.
And I think I often share with people that I see early on that some of the things they've been doing to support themselves might not even feel like they support them fully, but I often say these two words are important, which is for now, which is what you're saying, that in those situations where you're maybe waiting to get in to see a therapist, there will be things that you can do that are maybe not perfect or alleviate everything that you're experiencing, but they're good enough for now. And it's not saying that you're going to use them forever. It might shift and change, but rather than that pressure of feeling like you have to fix things, the idea of, okay, this helps a little bit, so I'm just going to do that for now.
Absolutely. So I think through the talk so far today, we've kind of gone through a few different instances, spaces, starting to just take apart this sort of feeling of, whoa, I don't even know what I'm looking for. Hopefully this has given you sort of a general sense of what of this whole thing. And I think the number one thing I know I felt, and I think that I sense from other people when talking to them, and this isn't my clients, this is like my family, my friends, when I talk about therapy, you can just see that they almost have a visceral reaction. Like, therapy, I don't need therapy. I'm fine, darling. And they get really, it's almost like they get defensive, like as if if we're saying like something's wrong with you. and something's so wrong with you that you need a
Yes.
therapist. And I think there's, again, a lot of this stigma attached to it, and it creates a lot of fear and a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. Why can't I do this by myself? Why? And I think that let's just unpack that a little bit, because I think that's a big barrier to when you know you need something, not accessing it.
Yes, yeah. Like I'm just pausing for a second because I feel like I want to say something that can feel very big, but it feels relevant in that it's understanding as human beings we're relational, like we are built to connect and be connected. And so I think around that idea of a counsellor or therapist, it's not that seeking counselling or therapy means that you're flawed or that there's something wrong with you. It's just that you're needing to have a connection to someone who can, going back to what I said before, bring a different perspective relationally that allows you to work out what you need. The therapist, as we keep saying, isn't there to change you or make you someone different. But they're there to have a connection with you over a period of time, build rapport, build a relationship with you so that you can work out what you need. And I think that's the misunderstanding because my family is the same, the idea of therapy with like, well, why would I do that? I can cope, I can manage. And it's just understanding of like, yeah, you probably can cope and you can manage. Going to a counsellor or therapist is actually going to enhance that.
Absolutely.
And actually build on that. Is more how I see things. But I know it can be hard to sort of get around that sort of idea of counselling and therapy is when you've got a problem or you're flawed or there's something wrong with you. It might be just that you're needing to connect and be with someone different who can help you see some parts of yourself that other people are not seeing yet, or maybe you're not seeing yet.
Absolutely. And I think, again, this whole idea, I think our society, if I might say, is very reactive and responsive to things. So we wait for something to get to a point where we haven't gone through that, just like I'm managing, I'm stabilizing, I'm self-regulating, and I'm looking for things to do that. We get to the point where we just sort of shut down, and we get to that point where we can't do life anymore. And so then we're really desperate. And I think that's sort of the feeling of this whole thing then, that feeling like a failure. So I think we set ourselves up for that in some cases. It can happen. But also that our society basically rewards waiting and being responsive. I mean, we see it in medicine, we see it, through reward systems in our life. So taking this more preventative approach, I would say, or this more sort of self-caring approach of actually putting into yourself and giving to yourself before that point is really important. I don't think we see enough of it. That's part of the reason for these talks as well, is to get the word out there, just to sort of take the edge off of this whole idea of looking after our whole health, looking after ourselves as if we are looking after our car, or you wouldn't let your car break down and sit in the driveway for weeks.
No.
You would deal with it straight away, and you'd fill up or charge up these days before it gets to zero. Are we doing the same thing?
That's right.
With ourselves and being kind to ourselves. So I think, and I would like to shift this idea of seeing therapy as we need it and we're desperate and we need to be fixed, as more as I'm doing this for myself. I'm doing this for myself so that I can be better for everybody around me in my relationships and spaces that I am. So I think that's part of the point. So, I think we're getting to the point where I naturally would like to say, well, who do I get? Which is all part of...
that's my feeling as well.
We've kind of taken apart all the sort of the things behind it, but the next part of this talk, which will be another vlog, is all about how to choose. What is the right therapy for me? How do I choose a therapist who is going to meet my needs or serve what I need at the moment? So... if we're okay with leaving things for today.
I think so, for me, because I'm, in a similar spot of thinking it feels like the next part that I want to talk about is the next part.
Let's get there.
So I feel like we can close off here and hope that some of what we've shared maybe just sort of lands with you in some way. And as Andrea said at the beginning, we're really open to comments on the YouTube channel or making contact with us through Andrea. We're really open to sort of hearing thoughts or ideas.
Yeah. Thanks, Greg. And I think just having these discussions, like you said, these riffs, it's just generating lots of ideas. And again, this is where we are today in our space. And even after these talks, we've gone away and sort of reflected and picked up new things. And I'm hoping that the same is true for you, that these new ideas will sort of just plant seeds that help to nurture and inspire different thoughts in your space. So we thank you for joining us, and please support us by listening and sharing, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.